Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. Thanks for being here with us on this Friday afternoon. It could even be Saturday morning. So to our friends just catching us on a Saturday morning on the other side of the date line, good morning to you. And as we like to say, wherever you are, we're glad you're here with us. And we've got 2 great hours with you, I am sure. I feel confident we've got 2 great hours with you. We've got Jimmy Akin for both hours. And we're going to dip into the mailbag. We've always called this Ask Me Anything of the internet variety. But I'm thinking about mailbag. What do you think, Jimmy?
Well, it's possible.
Okay, all right, we'll consider it because it's a lot to say, ask me
hmm
anything internet version. And I thought, or we could
You
maybe
you
call it internet mailbag, something like that.
you you could shorten it up by just calling it an internet Ask Me Anything
All right,
or
well,
an internet AMA.
yeah. And that's what it is. We've got about,
Mhm.
I forgot to count the questions, but it's roughly 1 million questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin. Jimmy Akin, of course,
Mhm.
senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the author of a whole bunch of books, including The Bible is a Catholic Book and A Daily Defense, 365 Days plus one to becoming a better apologist. But also very well known in the podcasting world because of the Jimmy Akin podcast, which is his younger podcast, and his older podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. How are you, Jimmy Akin?
I'm doing okay. Now we're pre-recording this. It's scheduled to go out on August 22nd, and August 22nd is a special day for me because it is the Queenship of Mary. It's also the day I was received into the Catholic Church. So
Oh,
this is gonna broadcast on the 33rd anniversary of my reception into the Catholic Church,
I,
which is kind of cool.
that is kind of cool. I feel like that's a special number 33 because we think of
Yeah.
Jesus as having died and risen on at the age of 33. So, which
Yeah.
is, do you think that's roughly correct? About 33?
He was a little over 33, but yeah, that's the conventional date. And you also mentioned me being known from my podcast, and I was surprised at how known I had become in Catholic circles. Recently, I was in Italy, and I was in Italy a number of years ago, and I was walking down the street in Rome, and these 2 seminarians were American seminarians were passing, and they recognized me, and they said, "Hi, Mr. Akin." And I thought that was interesting. I didn't think it was too surprising though, because they were American, and I was scheduled to give a talk at the Pontifical North American College, which is the seminary for Americans in Rome. And so it wouldn't be too surprising that seminarians there had like seen publicity for my talk and would know who I was. So I didn't think I thought that was interesting, but I didn't think it was too surprising. Well, this time when I was over in Italy, I was recognized by 25 strangers.
Really?
Yeah, I kept
Wow.
count. It started happening at the airport when I arrived, and these were people who were not part of my group. And they weren't all Americans. There were like Austrians who recognized me. There was a Brazilian who recognized me, and it started happening so quickly. Just upon arrival, I was recognized by 2 that I started keeping a list, and it turns out 25 different strangers recognized me, and sometimes multiple strangers in one day. And so I guess due to YouTube and my podcasts and stuff, my media profile has expanded in the last number of years.
That is wild, though. Like you were there for what?
Mhm.
Maybe a week and a half or
12
a couple,
days.
12
Yeah.
days,
Mhm.
and 25. Jimmy,
That's more than 2 a day.
you
Yeah.
actually lived one of my dreams. One of my dreams in
Mhm.
this life, and Darren's laughing because I always talk about it, is to be recognized at an airport. and I,
Mhm.
so I'm working to. It's actually a goal of mine. So you have achieved that. But that's
Yeah.
what that.
I was recognized at the airport, both coming and going. On the way in,
Oh, now you're just
I
rubbing
was
it in.
rec- I was recognized by an American and an American priest. On the way out, I
Yeah.
was recognized by an American couple and one of their sons.
Yeah, well, that's cool. It's the reach is extraordinary. And you, it's hard to know now. I mean, because you knew when you were on American media, okay, we're reaching a certain number of people in the United States, but you really don't know where it's reaching now. You have no
Mhm.
idea. That's why these folks who support the work we do, we have to say, and quite rightly, the people that are supporting Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World or people that are supporting this show, it's getting into places where you would never dream that you were getting.
Yeah.
And because of the availability.
You could be sitting at a cafe in Assisi and a couple of Austrians walk up and, "Are you Jimmy Akin?" Or you can be standing at a papal mass
What?
and a Brazilian comes up and says, "Are you Jimmy Akin?" So yeah.
I
How they recognize me, I don't know. I'm so nondescript,
I know
but
you really
they do
are.
it somehow.
They pick you out in a crowd somehow. That's
Mhm.
good for them. So you enjoyed Italy? I mean, I'm a little
Yeah,
jealous of
yeah.
that as well.
Well, if you want to be less jealous, it was also exhausting, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, uh,
But
yeah,
got to see a lot of cool stuff.
yeah. And getting recognized in airports. All right, well, I'm going to control my envy right now.
Okay.
But it is a Friday, so that means that there will be today, or there has been this morning, a new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Let's just say what that is before we go to questions.
It's about the mystery of radiation and
Oh,
how we discovered radiation. And it's a very interesting story. It's got a lot of twists and turns in it. But, radiation is one of the defining technologies and discoveries of the 20th century. And so I decided to devote an episode to telling the story of how we discovered it and some of the early things that happened with radiation that nobody was expecting because it had only just been discovered.
wow. Are the Radium Girls in this? You told me about them one
Yes,
time.
the Radium Girls are in this,
Yeah.
as well as Radiathor and Marie Curie and Wilhelm Röntgen and all kinds of interesting stuff.
Check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World today. That's a fun one. And educational, fun and educational. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. You can get it at mysterious.fm. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, and more people are getting it at Jimmy's YouTube channel. Just check out Jimmy Akin's YouTube channel to find it. All right, let's go to the mailbag. Can you get me some mailbag music? I want to do mailbag now. All right, internet mailbag. David wants to know this: when was the church really born? From Jesus' pierced side at the cross, or at the day of Pentecost?
Well, those are two commonly cited events. I think you can add additional events as well, like the initial preaching of Jesus, the baptism of Jesus, um, you know, after which he began preaching the gospel and the kingdom of God and so forth. The way I would look at it is the church is a complex reality. And as a result, the church does not have a single moment where it comes into existence, at least from what we can determine. It doesn't have a single moment where it suddenly comes into existence and had not existed in any form previously. In fact, the church is, it even has precedence in the Old Testament. But I think that there is something distinct about the church founded by the Messiah, and you can trace its beginning to different points in the Messiah's career. But there's no place in the New Testament where it says, and this is the moment the church was born.
Yeah.
And so I think what you have to do if you want to ask that question, which the text does not explicitly answer, is look at, well, what are some plausible points for when God did stuff that you could consider the birth of the church? I think the baptism of Jesus is one of them. I think the being born from his side on the cross, the crucifixion is another one. The resurrection is another one. The Pentecost is another one. And since we don't have a definitive answer saying this is uniquely the one, I would say it's all of them, that the church came into existence in different phases. And consequently, you can pick which one you want to use as the marker if you want to insist on the marker for when the church's birthday is. You can kind of pick that. But I would say ultimately we don't have a way of definitively deciding between them. The church's magisterium hadn't definitively decided this. And so I would say it's open to speculation, and you can look at it in different ways. But for me, the church is a complex reality that comes into existence in different stages, and we can mark some of those stages very easily based on what Scripture does tell us.
David, thank you very much for the question. Jimmy Akin is our guest. You don't have to travel to an Italian airport to see him. You can see him right here. We'll be right back with more questions for Jimmy right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live. Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1981. The FCC license to operate a satellite Earth station, the first ever given to an order of nuns, was granted to Our Lady of the Angels Monastery. Mother Angelica flips the switch and EWTN begins transmitting from Irondale, Alabama.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin, our guest. And all sorts of questions coming up. And sometimes these are hard questions, sometimes fun questions. Sometimes I feel like people think Jimmy is a member of the family. So they ask a question you'd ask a family member. And Juan wants to know this, Jimmy. Do you like fish tacos? Now, Juan goes on to say, might be better for a full-length Mysterious World episode. So,
well, I don't know. Who does he think I am? Tim Staples? That I would.
Come on!
Just speaking in terms of length, I have no idea about Tim's preference taste-wise. But yeah, I like fish tacos. Okay, I had not had. Now, I moved out to California in 1993, and at the time, it's likely to have changed, but at the time, fish tacos were kind of a new thing, and we didn't have them in Arkansas, but they did have them in San Diego, and I tried them, and I liked them okay. What I liked even better than fish tacos, though, was fish burritos.
Oh, really?
They had, I like fish burritos even better than fish tacos. And there was a taco stand near the old Catholic Answers office. And I would regularly go there for lunch and pick up, they had a drive-through, and I'd regularly go there for lunch and pick up fish burritos. And they were really good. I really enjoyed them. There's just something, the fish tacos, at least at Rubio's, which I gather was the chain that introduced them.
Yeah, they kind of popularized the fish taco. Yeah.
Yeah, they had they put them in a soft corn tortilla, and that was okay, but soft corn tortillas is not my favorite. And one of the things I liked about the fish burritos is that they were in a wheat burrito wrapper.
Oh, yeah.
And I liked the texture and taste of the wheat burrito wrapper better than I liked the taste and texture of the soft corn tortillas. But they were still good. I'd have them occasionally, but I really liked having fish burritos with Mexican hot sauce on it.
Well, now, this makes me curious. Now you're back in Arkansas. Has Mexican food spread there more than when you left?
Oh, yeah. There are a lot more Mexicans in the state now than there were 30 years ago, and which was something I noticed periodically. I'd come back and I would go to the Northwest Arkansas Mall for I'd come back for Christmas, and I do Christmas shopping. And so I'd go to the mall and stuff like that. And I remember being in the Northwest Arkansas Mall one year, this would be 25 years ago at this point, but for the first time hearing Spanish spoken in the Northwest Arkansas Mall. And that was just a sign of how many immigrants to the area we were having from Spanish speaking lands. And they're definitely part of the landscape here now.
And it does seem like Mexican food has spread everywhere now.
It kind of follows Mexicans. Yeah.
There was a time where there was places where it would be awful if you got Mexican. It would be somebody's attempt at it. But it's everywhere now. It's like pizza.
It's like everyone wants the kind of food they grew up with. And so it's, if you move somewhere, you tend to bring your own food along and you make it for others, and you start restaurants and things like that. And other people get to enjoy it. There's an old Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode, which is I think it's I Accuse My Parents, is the movie they were doing, which is a 1950s parental anxiety movie about if you don't raise your kids right, they're going to accuse you later. And so it's this old black and white 50s parental anxiety movie, and the guys who are riffing it are, they're watching this one scene of this down and out kid who later accuses his parents, going down the street. He's all alone in this town, and there's no one around, and he's just so lonely and forlorn. And one of the guys riffing the movie says, "I don't think I'm going to find any Thai food in this old town."
All right. Back to the questions we go. So it's a qualified yes on the fish tacos, but prefer the fish burrito on that one. Slans wants to know, I would like to know about Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. Does the word, in quotes, know, refer to knowledge or to a declaration? Doesn't Jesus know the day and hour through his divine nature? How does the hypostatic union work with regards to Jesus' knowledge about an event?
Okay, so the first thing to do is quote the verse so that people know what we're talking about. And Matthew 24:36 says, this is in Jesus's eschatological discourse, which is principally concerned with the destruction of the Jewish temple that happened in AD 70. And he's actually talking about, and this is clear in the parallel in Mark, he's actually talking about the destruction of the temple, not the end of the world. But the verse in Matthew says, "But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, except the Father alone." Now, there's a parallel to that in Mark's version. Mark's version is exclusively about the destruction of the temple. That's the only subject on the table, is when is the temple going to be destroyed. That verse is Mark 13:32. And it says basically the same thing. Now, Slans has asked, does the word know in this passage where it says concerning that day and hour no one knows, does that refer to knowledge or to a declaration? And the verb in Greek is oida, and it means to know cognitively, the same thing that it means in English. It does not refer to making a declaration. It's not like he's saying, I didn't come to say this. He's saying, the angels don't know this. I don't know this. Only the Father knows this. That's what the language says.
Okay.
Now, you can propose that he means something different, but that's what the language says. And we always want to start with, what does the language say? Also, I would note that this verb is in the perfect tense in Greek, which if I were to translate that, the perfect tense refers to something in the past that has continuing effects in the present. And so if I were to translate it freshly from Greek, I would say, no one has known that day, not the angels, not the Son, only the Father. So in the past, this has been the case, and it has effects in the present. No one still knows it. So he's emphasizing that this is an ongoing state of affairs. So how do we then understand this? Because Slan says, doesn't Jesus know the day and the hour through his divine nature? Well, he has a divine intellect, and because of his divine nature, and his divine intellect is omniscient and knows everything. So the answer is yes, he does in his divine intellect have this information, but it would seem, at least based on what he's saying, that he doesn't have the information in his human intellect. And that's the position, even though there have been different interpretations of this down through Christian history. The idea that he doesn't have the information in his human intellect, even though he does have it in his divine intellect, is the position that the Catechism of the Catholic Church endorses. If you look at paragraph 474 in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says this: by its union to the divine wisdom in the person of the Word incarnate, Christ enjoyed in his human knowledge the fullness of understanding of the eternal plans he had come to reveal. So it elsewhere acknowledges he knows everything in his divine intellect, but here it's saying in his human intellect, he knows everything that he came to reveal, which is a subset of everything, obviously. He didn't come to reveal everything. It then goes on to say what he admitted to not knowing in this area. And admitted is a factive verb that communicates this is true. So he admitted not knowing certain things in this area. It says what he admitted to not knowing in this area, he elsewhere declared himself not sent to reveal. So this is one of the things he hadn't come to reveal. And therefore, he didn't have that in the download from his divine intellect into his human intellect. At least that's the interpretation that the Catechism is proposing. And it's interesting when you look at the footnote in the Catechism at this point, it references the Markan parallel to this, Mark 13:32, and it references Acts 1:7, which is where the disciples asked Jesus, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel at this point? And he says, it's not for you to know that stuff. So it's noted that there are things in the future that Jesus had not come to reveal, as indicated in Acts 1:7. And that explains why he says he didn't know them in earlier passages like Mark 13:32 or Matthew 24:36. He didn't come to reveal these matters, and so according to the Catechism, he didn't have them in his human intellect.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Slans, for that question. We've got time for another before we have to go, and this comes from Repentant Sinner 7472. Congratulations on the repentance. Repentant Sinner wants to know this. In Steve Weidenkopf's book, Timeless, A History of the Catholic Church, he stated, quoting Hilaire Belloc, that the way we use the term Christianity today is an ahistorical post-Reformation term and not an accurate portrayal of our faith. Has the term Christianity evolved over time to mean something different than originally intended? For example, creating an equal standing among all Christian denominations as opposed to one single faith?
Okay, so I haven't read Steve Weidenkopf's book, Timeless, nor have I read what Hilaire Belloc is being quoted to have said, although it wouldn't surprise me that Hilaire Belloc would say such things. The fact is, language changes over time, and it changes in different communities. It changes to meet different needs as perceived by the language users within specific linguistic communities. And there are advantages and disadvantages when that happens, but there's no single usage that is definitively right and that everybody must adhere to, unless some authority determines that and says everybody must use the term this way. Well, the magisterium has no problem with using the term Christian to apply to groups that are not in full communion with Rome. That's why, for example, they have the dicastery for the promotion of Christian unity, through which they conduct dialogues with different groups of Christians. Now, it therefore would be an interesting question, and I'm open to seeing data about, well, did people prior to the Reformation not use the word Christian, for example, for the Eastern Orthodox who were not in communion with Rome? I'd have to see data on that, and I don't have data on that. It would kind of surprise me if they did, if they said, oh yeah, they're not Christians, when plainly they're baptized and they worship Christ and they have almost all the elements of the Christian faith as understood in the Catholic Church. My understanding is, my suspicion is they would have been called Christians, but they would have been identified as schismatic Christians, namely Christians who aren't in full union, using the language of the time. But it's definitely true that the term Christian has changed meaning over time, and I can show that from the New Testament. Because when you read the New Testament, there are only 3 passages where the word Christian appears. And it is made clear that this was not originally a term that Christians used. In Acts 11:26, Luke writes that when Barnabas had found Paul, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year, they met with the church and taught a great many people. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. Notice it's passive voice. They were called Christians. They didn't call themselves Christians. They themselves said, we follow the way. But other people called them Christians, which would kind of be like today saying someone is a Christer. It's this new term that links you to your origin. It's not very polite either. And we see that later in Acts 26:28, Agrippa says to Paul, in such a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian? Would you get me to be a Christer in such a short time? And similarly, in 1 Peter 4:6, Peter says, if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. So you can see how by Peter's time, Christians are starting to embrace the name. But it wasn't originally our own term for ourselves, and it's changed meaning over time.
Jimmy Akin, our guest. More questions right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns to the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. Join special guests Scott and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, and an all-star lineup of speakers September 26th through 29th. Spend time with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and our special guests right here in beautiful San Diego. Seats are still available, but going fast. We'd love to see you there. Register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
The stigmata, the appearance of Christ's wounds on ordinary believers. Is it real or fake? What's the evidence? And if real, what could God's reason be for causing this? In God's Wounds, author John Clark offers what may be the most thorough, honest, and faithful reckoning with the stigmata ever written, examining the evidence and making sense of it both medically and spiritually. Order God's Wounds today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Lots of questions in for our guest, the world famous Jimmy Akin. That's gonna be. Maybe that's a bit much. Maybe that would make you feel like a lot of pressure to really deliver. If I start calling you the world famous Jimmy Akin, that might be a bit much.
It might be a bit much, although I am secretly famous.
I don't know what secretly famous means. What's that mean?
Well, so one of my mentors as a square dance caller, is a guy named Nasser Shukair.
Okay.
And he's a real character. And he apparently was in, I think it was somewhere in Scandinavia, or so it may have been like an airport in Denmark, let's say. And Nasser, being the loud, rambunctious character that Nasser is, he was apparently in this airport yelling about how he wanted to meet someone famous. And so the locals found a guy who was at the airport and who was famous for like a scientific discovery and brought him up to Nasser to meet him. and Nasser was so pleased by this that he wrote about it in his email newsletter.
Okay.
And I happened to read it. And so, I don't make a big deal of myself when I'm, in different roles. I don't talk about like, oh yeah, I'm this well-known Catholic apologist if I'm in a square dance circle.
Right.
So, why show off? Just I'm there to do my thing and enjoy the activity and so forth. But since Nasser had raised this question, I mentioned to him, I emailed back and said, if you're, it's surprising who you meet that's secretly famous. I believe he had used the term secretly famous for this guy they introduced him to. But I said, Google my name and look at the number of hits you get. Because at the time, Google would display that. It still has that information. You just have to go looking for it.
Oh, I see.
But at the time on the page, it would just say, there's like 1 million hits here. So I told him to Google my name and see how many hits there were. And he did. And he was impressed to learn that he knew a second secretly famous person.
Famous Jimmy. Though that I will do. I will secretly famous Jimmy Akin, our guest. But which is funny because I bet there are a lot of people who know you who are just discovering that you're a square dance caller. Mm-hmm. So you're secretly famous the other way as well. To
a certain extent.
Yeah. This one comes from Longbeard. And Longbeard wants to know this, Jimmy. A hard question, Longbeard. What does divine simplicity mean in terms of the mind of God? Does he think about things? How does that work?
Well, so this is something that there has been a lot of discussion of philosophically and theologically, and there are different attitudes towards exactly how divine simplicity should be understood and exactly what it means in terms of divine cognition. And I don't have, this isn't a college course, so I don't have time to go through them all, but I can give you a few things that I think may be helpful. The first one is God does have awareness of things. So he does have a divine intellect, but his intellect does not work the same way ours does, because our intellects are characterized by limitation. We have only a limited amount of knowledge, and we have to acquire new knowledge over the course of time because we're time-bound creatures. And so as the world around us changes, we have to learn about those changes and what the world is like now. We also have a limited amount of information processing capacity, so we have to reason our way through chains of reasoning. So you may observe, it's cloudy and there's water on the ground, therefore it must have rained. And we would work our way through that kind of one step at a time if we're putting it in formal terms. Well, all of those things are due to the limitations that human intellects work with. But God, being unlimited, does not have, or infinite, that's just what infinite means, is unlimited. God does not have those limitations in his intellect. So God is aware of everything all at once. He's not he is not bound by time. He exists in an eternal now outside of time. And so he sees all of history all at once, every fact about it. He knows everything. And he therefore doesn't have to reason his way through chains of inference the way we do. He, in fact, being outside of time doesn't pass for him. So he can't reason his way through chains of inference because time doesn't pass for him. He sees the entire chain all at once. And so those are some of the things that apply to how God's intellect is different than ours. But what Longbeard is asking is more specifically about divine simplicity and how that might affect his intellect. Well, so simplicity is the quality of not having parts. That's what the term means in a philosophical, theological context. And it is a teaching of the church that God is simple, that he is not made of parts the way we are. So the fact that God is simple has often been understood to mean that he doesn't think in propositional ways the way we do. Our minds, we tend to put things in propositions, like it is cloudy, there is water on the ground, therefore it is rained. Those are three different propositions. But it's commonly proposed at least by authors, for example, in the Thomistic school, that God does not think propositionally, that if he did, then his intellect would have parts and it would violate simplicity. And so the proposal is, and this is not church teaching, this is a theological proposal that's been made to explain the church teaching of simplicity, is that God thinks non-propositionally. He's just aware of everything all at once, and he doesn't have to break it down into individual propositions the way we do. So he has a more holistic knowledge of things compared to our knowledge of things in parts.
Longbeard, thank you very, very much for the question. I do think there's some association in English of the term simplicity with something low or something not
sophisticated.
Yeah, not sophisticated. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's like in the Pirates. It's like in the Pirates of Penzance, when the pirates discover that Major General Stanley is not actually an orphan, and they are astonished to learn that he has practiced on our credulous simplicity.
Yeah, right. But like, if we call a person simple, like nobody uses that term anymore, but there is that tradition of, oh, he's simple, meaning not
Slow.
Yeah, not intelligent,
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. And that's when you got to work your way past.
Funny how words have different meanings in different contexts, isn't it?
Yeah, but they bleed over. That's the thing. And so I think a lot of people have to work their way past certain meanings to settle on what the philosopher means by simplicity.
That's why I clarified what it means in a philosophical context. Yeah.
Next, a happy pilgrim wants to know. I had a friend recently tell me that the traditional Latin Mass community just wants to have the same liturgy as it was since the beginning. I thought we had several liturgies over the centuries. When I told him that, he said, no, it's the Roman canon that has always been the same, and Vatican II changed that. He said if we could just keep the Roman canon in place as it's always been, the issues would be resolved. Is that true?
Okay, so I'm dependent on what a happy pilgrim says about this encounter. I wasn't there, so there could be something lost in transmission. But assuming that happy pilgrim is reporting accurately and completely what the person said, I would say there are some inaccuracies there. The fact is that the church has had multiple different forms of liturgy throughout the last 2 millennia. Now, the traditional Latin Mass goes back a good ways, but it does not go back to the 1st century. Scholars have linked the formation of an early form of the TLM to Pope Gregory the Great, or Pope Gregory the First, around AD 590. But it's clear, and it developed since then. It wasn't the same it hadn't been in the same form. I mean, popes all the way down through the ages have been added and subtracted bits from it. Like, for example, Pope Leo XIII added the St. Michael prayer at the end. That was a new prayer that hadn't been part of the liturgy before. But when it comes to what's known as the Roman canon, it's clear that doesn't go all the way back to the beginning. And one of the ways you can show that is it's got this massive list of saints in it. And those saints didn't all live in the 1st century. So, for example, it meant the saint list includes Cosmas and Damian, and they died around the year 300. So their inclusion in the Roman canon couldn't have been before the year 300 at the earliest. So it's clear that this does not go all the way back to the 1st century. It is a creation of later ages. And so I wouldn't misrepresent it by claiming a greater antiquity for it than it actually has. I think we need to be accurate in the antiquity that we claim for it. We don't want to diminish its antiquity, but we also don't want to exaggerate its antiquity. We want to be accurate. Also, if the claim is we just need the Roman canon, well, we've still got the Roman canon. It's now called Eucharistic Prayer number 1. So it's still there. And if you want a priest to say the Roman canon, just encourage him to say Eucharistic prayer number 1. I don't think that, and you can even say it in Latin if you want. So I think that there's some oversimplification going on in this question, whether the oversimplification is on the part of how the question is being presented, or if it's in the views of the person that, that Happy Pilgrim was talking to. That I can't say, but I think there is oversimplification here. I'd also say that I think that I support the traditional Latin Mass movement of, if they prefer the previous liturgy and they want to have it, great. I think that's wonderful. I want them to have it too. I don't know that them problem in the church though, because the church has problems from multiple sources, and I don't think you can just say everything would be great if we just had the pre-1962 version of the liturgy. There were problems in the church before 1962, and even if that liturgy was being used universally today, which I don't think there's a realistic chance of, but even if it were, there would still be problems in the church today. So I don't think we should look at the liturgy as a magic cure-all for the problems in the church. But I do think that some people grow closer to God. They relate to God better through the more traditional form of the liturgy, and I want them to have it.
Happy Pilgrim, thank you very much for the question. That has taken us to the break. We'll be right back with more questions for Jimmy Akin from the internet mailbag on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers, the most trusted name in Catholic apologetics.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
He is only one of 4 popes honored as the Great.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Leo I was pope at a time when Roman civilization was being overrun by barbarian armies. He stood as a light in the darkness and even saved the city of Rome from destruction by Attila and the Huns. Leo died in 461.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Hey, the big Catholic Answers Conference coming up just a month from now, a month and 3 days. We start on September 25th. If you'd like to come, just go to CatholicAnswersConference.com and find out all about it. Jimmy will be one of the featured speakers there. All of our apologists will be speaking. Chris Stefanik will be speaking. Dr. David Anders. We're going to have a great time. We'd love it if you'd come. CatholicAnswersConference.com. Next question comes from Divine Mercy Catechesis, and it's a brief question. As a sci-fi fan, what do you think of Futurama?
Okay, so Futurama is a science fiction-based animated television show created by the producers of The Simpsons. And I've seen some Futurama, and I've enjoyed it. It's not like The Simpsons. It's not entirely family-friendly, but it's substantially, very interesting and funny, and it's not as bad as some animation in terms of family friendliness. There are some shows I just don't watch because of how family unfriendly they are. But Futurama is one that, if you're an adult and you can have a bit of a thick skin, it's got a lot of enjoyable content in it. I think in particular of certain individual scenes that I've seen that I think are just really funny. The story in Futurama is about a guy named Stephen J. Fry, who's from the 20th century, and he's a pizza delivery boy. But he accidentally gets frozen cryogenically and wakes up in like the 30th century or something. And so this is a massive culture shock to him. And he meets this one-eyed, purple-haired woman named Leela, and is talking to her about how bad his life was in the 20th century and how he didn't have anybody and how nobody cared about him and how people treated him like dirt and stuff like that. And she says, well, Fry, one thing I can tell you is here in the future, no one is ever going to treat you in a dehumanized manner. Now strip naked and get on the probulator. So I think about that. There's also an episode where they go to the edge of the universe and they have those kind of telescopes, you know, that you look in them with both eyes and you put a coin in and you get to see through the telescope, and they're looking out the edge of the universe with those. And Leela and the other regular characters, they're taking Fry there because he's never been to the edge of the universe before. And Leela's saying at that point, like, you know, it's funny, you live in the universe, you never think to go these places until you have a visitor.
Right.
There's also a really great sequence about the dangers of dating robots. Because it tells a cautionary story about a boy named Billy who he's kind of patterned like he's from the 1950s, but he has that kind of boy next door 1950s quality. But instead of dating and marrying and reproducing with a human girl, he gets obsessed with his Marilyn Monroe bot. And all he wants to do is make out with his Marilyn Monroe bot. And as a result, he becomes an old man and he never gets married and he never has children. And that leaves Earth open to it being invaded by aliens and conquered because there's no new generation to stand up for Earth. And all of this is like a cautionary film, you know, about the dangers of don't date robots. And it's endorsed by the Space Pope. And who's like this alligator-like creature. Yeah.
Right.
But I think the Space Pope and like the real Pope would endorse the don't date robots message.
Right.
There's also another episode where one of the regulars in this is a robot named Bender. And Bender at one point is having a dream. And he's like locked in he's in a robot apartment, which appears to be like the size of a closet, but he's got Stephen Fry over and they're locked in this closet together and Bender's asleep and having a dream. And in his dream, he's saying stuff like, hey, honey, how you doing? You want to kill all humans? And he keeps having this dream about being in a romantic relationship with another robot and killing all humans. And it's getting on Fry's nerves, and he wakes Bender up, and Bender is like, hey, Fry, I just had this great dream, and you were in it. So there's a lot of funny stuff in Futurama.
I just looked up the Space Pope. He is very crocodilish. Thank you very much. That question came from Divine Mercy Catechesis. Thank you for the question, Divine Mercy Catechesis. This one comes from Cheeky Sheiky. Hi, Jimmy. I'm a lapsed Catholic, baptized as a child, but really wanting to return to the church and rediscover my faith. What steps should I take to do this?
Well, so if you've been baptized, you are Catholic, and you can, at your age, in principle, begin living a sacramental life. You would need, like, in order to receive the Eucharist, you'd need to go to confession if it's been some time since you've been to confession. If you have not been confirmed, you'll also want to get confirmed at some point, but you don't need to do that before going to confession or return into the Eucharist. You can do those independently of getting confirmed. I would suggest, well, you're already watching Catholic Answers Live or my channel on YouTube, and those are great resources to learn more about your faith. And then you can also specifically look up information at Catholic.com about how to go to confession, especially if it's been a while. You want to make an examination of conscience, and there are guides to examining your conscience that can be found online that can be of help. And there are also practical guides, like we have, I think, a tract at Catholic.com about how to go to confession. But then you can go to confession and be absolved and begin receiving the Eucharist, assuming you believe what the Church believes about the Eucharist, which we also have lots of great resources about at Catholic.com. So you can, kind of work through those two issues and begin living a normal sacramental life. If you've not been confirmed yet, then you need to see about doing that as well. You can also immediately start going to Mass on Sundays and other days, depending on the schedule that it's offered in your area at down in Australia. So I would just say, well, keep watching Catholic Answers Live, keep listening to or watching good Catholic videos on YouTube to learn about your faith, and start going to Mass. And then when you're ready, go to confession and begin receiving the Eucharist again. And if you need to, go get confirmed as well. And that's something you'll need to talk to the people in your parish about, and they can help guide you through that process as well.
God bless you, Cheeky. Thank you very much for the question. On we go. We got time. I got time to do another question. Steenie 2499 wants to know this. Is it sinful to have your ashes combined with the ashes of a beloved pet, meaning in the same container mixed together? A friend's mother is considering, and I had no idea how to respond.
Okay, so there is not a direct answer. This isn't so much a moral question as it is a legal question. People's bodies fall apart after they die. And I mean, that's the whole thing, dust thou art and to dust thou shalt return. They knew very well in the ancient world people's bodies decay. And that matter from which they've decayed into gets mixed up with other matter as well. So it's not like we have to keep our bodies pristinely preserved and isolated from all other matter. We tend to do something similar to that in our culture, but they didn't in Jesus's. In Jesus's culture, they would put your body in a tomb, and they would expect it to decay. They didn't embalm it the way we embalm people today. And after a year, all you'd have left were bones. So they'd come back after a year and clean the bones and put them in a bone box known as an ossuary for long-term storage. But all that other matter that your body was made out of, that got dispersed into the environment. And so, so the idea of keeping our bodies like pristinely isolated in a coffin or some other container is not morally required. Now, can our bodies be mixed, like the cremated remains of our bodies be mixed with other cremated remains? Well, there was a document that came out from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith in the last couple of years where they answered that question as yes. Now, they weren't answering it in terms of with a pet, but of can you create a memorial which has the cremated remains of multiple people together in that memorial? And the answer was yes, as long as you preserve the names of those people so that people can come by and pray for them. This is similar to recently I was in Rome, and they have a Capuchin monastery there where they didn't cremate anybody, but they have these ossuary chambers where they have all this artwork made by combining the bones of the monks who used to live in the monastery. So you'll see, like, here's a chandelier made from the bones of former monks and stuff. And that also involves combining the in this time in a non-cremated form, but it involves combining the bones of individuals. So there's not a moral problem here. There's also not a legal problem as far as I can see. Basically, if you think about it, I mean, take cremation out of it for a second. What you're proposing is you got a favored pet and you're being buried with the pet. Well, there's no law against that as far as I know. And Psychelet, as I'm sure you know, people have been buried with favorite pets forever in human history, back to the Neolithic. And so I don't see a legal problem here if it's something that your friend's mother is considering.
I don't know how the pet's going to feel about it, but okay, we're going to take a quick break. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and we've got a lot more to come. Lots more questions right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest. All the questions are in on this Friday afternoon already. I am Cy Kellett, your host, so you can just relax and enjoy the questions. I won't be giving out the phone number because, well, we don't have anybody to answer the phones, and even if we did, we recorded this in the past. So, Jimmy
You need
Akin,
a super phone to get through to us.
that would be a heck of a phone. You would have to have a very advanced phone. I think there was a movie where
Doctor Who.
Go
Doctor
ahead.
Who's done that.
He's talked on the phone to the past.
Oh, yeah. Well, he upgraded Rose Tyler's cell phone so she could talk to her mom in the past.
I wonder who I would call if I could talk to someone in the past. But it would have to be after the phone was invented. Maybe Alexander Graham Bell. Would that freak him out or what?
Probably.
All right, let's get back to the questions. We got a whole bunch of questions for Jimmy Akin. And if you have questions for Jimmy Akin, you can get in touch with him. He's easy to get in touch with online and give them to Jimmy or send them to us here at radio@catholic.com. Omega Rio wants to know, was the Holy Spirit on earth at all before Jesus in any way, like how the angel of the Lord is, or could be Jesus?
Yeah, so since Omega has referenced the angel of the Lord, I'll explain that first for folks who may not be aware. In the Old Testament, there is a figure known as the angel of the Lord who shows up in various passages. And depending on how you read it, I mean, it could always be the same individual or it could just be different angels. Referring to the angel of the Lord could just mean the angel who showed up this time. Not like there's one angel of the Lord. But what some folks have noticed is that the angel at times seems to speak for God, as if he's in the person of God. And that led some in the Jewish community prior to the time of Christ to propose what's known as the it's known by this name today as the two powers in heaven doctrine, that in addition to Yahweh, you have a second divine figure in heaven who's sometimes called the little Yahweh or the lesser Yahweh, who is also divine but somehow distinct from the major Yahweh. And in Christian circles, it became common for many of the early church fathers to propose that the angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Christ. And that's an interesting theory. It's not something the church teaches, but it's an interesting theory. And there are arguments that can be made for and against it. But we do have, I think, some evidence for the pre-incarnate Christ doing stuff before the incarnation. And we definitely have, to get to his question, we definitely have the Holy Spirit present in the Old Testament. The Holy Spirit is referred to multiple times in the Old Testament. And in particular, the Holy Spirit is referred to in connection with the prophets, such that prophets are said to have the Holy Spirit within them. This occurs with prophets like Ezekiel and Daniel and so forth. And it's just kind of understood that the prophets have the Holy Spirit of God inside them. And at least on certain occasions, they have the Holy Spirit inside them, and that enables them to deliver inspired utterances like prophecies from God. We then find in the New Testament that all Christians are going to have the Holy Spirit dwelling in them. And this is not presented as, oh, this is something totally unheard of. It's an extension of what was already the case in a limited way in the Old Testament. Some people, namely the prophets, did have the Holy Spirit working in them. And now that blessing is going to be shared by everybody in the Christian community. And so it represents an extension of something that was already going on and a popularization or democratization of this blessing to the entire community.
All right. Thank you very much, Omega Rio, for the question. Maybe Wojtex. Wojtex. All right. Wojtex 5132. Are Christians who do good because they believe in God like psychopaths on a leash? One common atheist objection goes like this. If you were ever to become certain that God does not exist and there's no ultimate purpose, would that change your behavior? Would you be more inclined to do evil? If the answer is yes, and if God is basically the only thing keeping you from doing evil or simply more evil, then you sound like a pretty dangerous person. Would it be fair for a Christian to say, perhaps if my life or even the whole universe truly turned out to be meaningless, then I suppose I would just follow my various desires, even if they were things I currently consider sinful?
Okay, so it seems to me that this objection from the atheist is confusing two separate issues. One is the existence of God, and the second is the purposefulness or meaningfulness of life. Because you'll notice the way the objection is phrased. If you were ever to become certain that God does not exist and that there is no ultimate purpose, would that change your behavior? Well, and specifically, would you be more inclined to do evil? Well, there are a number of ways one can approach that, but notice we're not just talking about one issue here. It's not just that you become convinced there is no God, it's that you then become convinced that there is no meaning to life. There's no purpose to it. And it seems to me that in terms of acting good or bad, it's the latter that is the more decisive. Even if you thought there is no God, but you still think there's meaning and purposefulness and good and evil in life, you could still be a good person, even if you didn't believe in God. It's not just the existence of God that is leading you to do good. It's your belief that there is such a thing as moral goodness in the world that's leading you to do that. Now, that may be something that would please the atheist and say, yeah, and see, I'm an atheist and I think that moral goodness is real. That's why I'm good. So I don't need God to convince me to be good. And okay, well, I would say that's good for the atheist. It's good that they are trying to be a good person. I would say that if they look closer at the grounding of their belief in moral goodness in the world without the existence of God, it's harder to ground. And so I would say it's good that you want to be a good person, even though you don't believe in God, but you do want to look at the foundation of your belief in moral goodness in the world. And if you do that, I think you need to be open to God as an explanation for why good and evil exist in the world, why that's a meaningful distinction. So I think that the situation is still going to play to the advantage of the person who believes in God. It's just going to require a little more work to get there. On the other hand, let's pose the other challenge. Let's suppose, okay, let's talk to the atheist again and say, okay, you're halfway there to the challenge you've just posed. You said you don't believe in God. What if you then became convinced that there's no purpose in life, that there's no good and evil, that there's no meaning? Would that lead you to do something bad compared to what you do now? And the answer presumably would be, yeah, if you, just like for a Christian, if you become convinced of the meaninglessness of life, that there is no ultimate good and evil, it's all just meaningless, well, that likely could change your behavior in some way. Would that mean you're a psychopath, though? Well, no, not necessarily. What psychopathy is a condition where a person fundamentally lacks empathy with others, and they treat others in a non-empathic way, where they just don't care about the feelings of others, except insofar as it helps the psychopath get what they want. But they don't, if you have pain in your life and stuff like that, then you just don't care about that person's pain. I mean, it's irrelevant to you unless it has an impact on your own goals. So psychopathy and sociopathy, which is a related condition, involve a fundamental lack of empathy with others. But the thing is, empathy is built into us. And so even if most people, whether Christian or atheist, became convinced that that there is no objective good or evil, they still would have this empathic call in their heart to care about other people and their feelings. And so it would be inaccurate for most people to say, well, if you're a Christian and you become convinced the world is meaningless, you're just going to become a sociopath and not care about anyone's feelings. Well, okay, no. And that wouldn't happen to most people. And the way we know that wouldn't happen to most people is that's the situation atheists are in, and they don't become sociopaths. Many atheists are of the opinion that the world does not contain good or evil. Not all of them, but many of them. And they don't suddenly lose all empathy for other human beings. And so this objection on the part of the atheist doesn't grapple with that reality. The reality is that most humans, at least the way they're raised today, do have a fundamental empathy for others, and that keeps reasserting itself even in situations where a person doesn't believe in an objective existence for good and evil. And so consequently, it wouldn't stop an atheist from not being a sociopath if they believe good and evil don't exist, and it wouldn't stop a Christian from being a sociopath. It wouldn't cause a Christian to become a sociopath just because they lose their faith and become convinced there is no good and evil in the world. That fundamental empathy is still going to be there in a majority of people. Now, that's not to say that it wouldn't have any impact on a person's behavior. It might well. You know, if a Christian or an atheist becomes convinced there's no such thing as good and evil, objectively speaking, well, then that would affect how they act on some things. They might cut themselves slack on adultery, for example, or fornication, or pornography, or things like that. But that doesn't mean that they would just become homicidal murderers if they thought they could get away with it. So I think it would damage the person to come to the conclusion that good and evil don't really exist, but it wouldn't mean that they would just go whole hog and become completely amoral. But I also think it's going to apply equally to atheists as Christians. So I don't think that I need to see how an atheist applies this in a particular situation. But if it's presented the way Wojtek has presented it here, I would say it's going to apply to atheists just as much as it's going to apply to Christians.
Wojtek, thank you very much for the question. I hope that answer was helpful to you. We'll take a very quick break. We'll be right back with lots more questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live with Jimmy Akin is coming right back.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
The power of prayer simply means that words have an effect. For example, when a couple says, "I do," it literally changes two people to becoming one in marriage. When you say, "I love you," it changes us and it gives us value. The power of prayer is in the words and in the sentiment, but it's also in the fact that God, who is omnipotent, all-powerful, answers our prayers.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. The questions from the internet are endless because people are endless in their questioning. So we got lots of them for Jimmy. And let's see where I forget. Oh, I was at Koalam, 888.
Koalam.
Oh, Koalam.
Yeah.
Was I closer? Was he in the ballpark? Cholam.
Well, it was better. Yeah.
All right.
Cholam is how that KH is normally represented in a variety of different languages.
All right. Well, K-H-O-Alam. I don't know why I did that. He wants to know, did Christ carry the whole cross or just the horizontal beam?
We don't know. Roman practice on crucifixion was varied, so it was done different ways at different times. And what we are told is that Jesus carried his stauros, and that could be a reference. The term stauros in Greek, it actually doesn't mandate a cross specifically. It can just be a stauros can just be an upright pole. It also can be a cross with a cross beam. So it's an upright pole with a cross beam. And given that we're told he carried it, there is at least some suggestion it could have that it may have been the cross beam, and then they nail you to the cross beam, and then they hoist up the cross beam and hang it on the upright pole. But we don't have the details. It doesn't give us the details. And so we have to leave a lot of this to God, because he didn't choose to be more specific when he inspired the 4 Gospels.
Thank you very much for the question. This one comes from Jotolo 1840. Day by day, what happened to Jesus between his death and resurrection? What happened to all the people who had died before Jesus? What happened to the good thief during the same period? Thank you.
Well, I can't answer all those questions because we're not given the information needed to answer them. We are given a few passages that discuss what happened with Jesus following the crucifixion, but we aren't given a day-by-day reconstruction of it's like we don't have his day planner for the afterlife. So I can't say, oh, this happened on Friday and this happened on Saturday and this happened on Sunday, beyond he died on Friday and he rose on Sunday. We're just not given enough information about the interim to construct a detailed chronology. Also, they're asking about what happened to all the people who had died before Jesus. And I assume that means in the ages before Jesus. And then what happened to the good thief? Well, okay, so all the people who died before Jesus went to Sheol, or the place of the dead. The common view is that they did not ascend to God to be in heaven before the time of Christ. Instead, they were kept in different places in Sheol based on the things that had happened with them in life. And we see that in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man in Luke's gospel, where Lazarus and the rich man both die. And so they both go to Sheol, the place of the afterlife, the place of the dead, but they're in very different conditions. Lazarus goes to be comforted in the bosom of Abraham, and the rich man goes to a place of torment. So this is a recognition that prior to the crucifixion, there was a differentiation of the fates of individuals who had been alive. And we see this not just here in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, but there are actually Jewish apocalyptic works like First Enoch that go into this same thing, and they'll talk about there being different chambers. Like I think in First Enoch there are 4 different chambers for people who have had different things happen to them in life, and the details vary. But there is a recognition that those who did good in life are going to have good things happen to them in the afterlife, and those who did bad things in life are going to have bad things happen to them in the afterlife. When it comes to the good thief in particular, the most informative statement we have is Luke 23:43, where Jesus tells him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." More fully, what Jesus says is, "I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And there's ambiguity about where does that today go? Does it go with the "I tell you," or does it go with "you will be with me in paradise"? if it's the former, then Jesus is saying, I tell you today, you're going to be with me in paradise. In which case, it doesn't tell us anything about when he's going to be with Jesus in paradise. Jesus has just given him that assurance today. On the other hand, if it goes with the latter, Jesus would be saying, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise, meaning this very day. Okay, well, then that would imply, if Jesus descended to the dead, that paradise was with the rest of the righteous dead at this point. It wasn't yet up in heaven. And so the thief would have been with Jesus in paradise in Sheol that day, kind of the way we see Lazarus being in Abraham's bosom. That would seem to be a paradisical environment for Lazarus to be in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And so effectively, the same thing would be happening for the good thief. But that's about as far as we can go. In a few other passages, we have some other statements that may have a bearing on the issues of what did Jesus do between his death and resurrection. One of them is 1 Peter 3, verses 18 and 19, where it says, Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. Okay, so this says that Jesus preached to spirits who were in prison, and it appears that he's doing that between his death and resurrection. And this is one of the most mysterious passages in the New Testament, because it doesn't give us very much data about these spirits. We know when they were disobedient. It was during the days of Noah, but we're not told much else. We're also not told why Jesus is preaching to them. There are a number of possibilities here. A common proposal that tends to get quickly shot down is these are spirits and Jesus is of humans, and Jesus is preaching to them to give them a second shot after death at salvation. But that's problematic, because Hebrews says it's appointed a man once to die and then the judgment. We don't get a second shot after our deaths. So another proposal is that these are spirits who are human, and Jesus is proclaiming to them, hey, I've done everything now, but too bad you guys don't get in on this goodness that I've provided, because you disobeyed long ago and didn't heed God's message. And so it's kind of bad news for you. Then there's a third possibility, which I think has a lot going for it, actually, that these are not human spirits at all. These are angelic spirits, or spirits of, I hate to say it this way, but what would today be considered angelic human hybrids. Because if you look at the secondary literature that was around in this area, like the book of First Enoch and the book of Jubilees, it interprets the events leading up to Noah's Ark as involving a rebellion on the part of angelic spirits, who then mated with human women and gave rise to gigantic offspring that then, between the angels who fell and their half-human offspring, it corrupted mankind in such a way that it led to the flood. This is very common interpretation in Second Temple literature, and there is a significant likelihood that that is what Peter is referring to here, because the disobedience of these spirits is linked to the events of Noah's time. So if we're looking for spirits of someone who disobeyed in the time leading up to Noah, this is the major theory that you get presented with in Second Temple literature, in which case Jesus is preaching to them is explained as, hey, I'm here preaching the gospel. God's kingdom is arriving, and that means the foretold judgment on y'all is about to come. And so that would make sense of why Jesus preaches to them, because they had been put in captivity in prison, in spirit prison, until the end of the world. And Jesus is now announcing, okay, we're in the final age now. God's judgment is coming for y'all, just like he said all those years ago. So that's a possibility for what this is referring to. There's also Ephesians 4:8, where it says, when Jesus ascended on high, he led a host of captives and gave gifts to men. People have interpreted that as Jesus transitioning human souls to heaven, but I think it's actually more the reverse. He's leading demons captive that he's conquered. That's the standard imagery of a triumph. If you're leading captives, it's people you've conquered.
Thank you very much for the question, Jatolo. That takes us to the break. We will be right back because we got a whole bunch more questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Do you have what it takes to defend your Catholic faith? The work of apologetics takes study, practice, and skill, but more than anything, it takes spiritual strength. The Soul of Apologetics, a new prayer resource from Catholic Answers, gives you the spiritual tools every Catholic apologist needs: prayers, meditations, and scripture-based reflections to build up the interior life. Order your copy of The Soul of Apologetics today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world. But it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun. And that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Welcome back. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and all the questions are in. All the questions have come to us via the internet. And the next one comes from Alpha 4 the Fourth. Does holy tradition and the existence of the magisterial teaching protect us from any and all critical biblical scholarship findings? Or is it possible for a legit discovery or academic consensus to come through critical biblical scholarship that could hurt or undermine the claims of the Catholic Church when it comes to the Bible, in what the Bible actually says or teaches, as is now happening with many Protestant presuppositions and sola scriptura when faced with secular scholarship consensus?
So the existence of sacred tradition is a help in Catholic circles, but it doesn't determine the meaning of most individual passages in Scripture. And so if you adhere to sacred tradition, like, baptism regenerates and the Eucharist really is Jesus Christ and stuff, that's going to help insulate you from certain problems that could otherwise exist. The teaching of the magisterium also will do the same thing. It'll help people resist misinterpretations of Scripture proposed by critical biblical scholarship or other groups, provided that the magisterium uses its authority. But it may not do so in a manner that it doesn't necessarily leap on every potential problem the minute the problem appears. In many cases, it's not obvious whether a particular teaching would undermine the Christian faith, because it may not approach it in a way that is directly undermining. And there have been problems in the past when the church acted too quickly. For example, 100 years ago, there was a proposal that the book of Isaiah may have been written by more than one author, that there was a historical Isaiah who lived in the 8th century BC, but then and who wrote the first part of Isaiah, but then later prophets ended up who were like part of an Isaiah school and respected the historical Isaiah, later wrote prophecies that became incorporated into the later parts of the book. And these are known as Deutero-Isaiah, and some have also proposed a Trito-Isaiah, meaning second and third Isaiah. Okay, well, initially, when this got proposed, and this is something Pope Benedict talked about, it was viewed as a threat to the Christian faith. And so elements of the magisterium reacted very quickly and said, you can't teach this. Unfortunately, they overreacted, and there were ways to harmonize this proposal with the Christian faith. It was realized that as long as who wrote different parts of Isaiah were divinely inspired, well, then it's still the Word of God. Its status as the Word of God does not depend on it all being written by one guy. And so, as Pope Benedict pointed out, the magisterium was overly restrictive in how it approached this question, and it lost credibility because later many later biblical scholars concluded that Isaiah was written by more than one person. And in fact, if you look at the writings of Pope John Paul II, he's one of them. He talks about Isaiah and Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah all the time. So you even have popes endorsing this later view. Now, I'm not saying I'm convinced by this later view. I have an open mind on the subject. But if you assume too quickly that an idea just undermines the Christian faith, you will cause additional problems, and you'll hamper the proper growth of scholarship and things like that. And so, you can lose credibility for the magisterium if you clamp down on something too quick. And as a result, the magisterium is less likely these days, with this kind of experience in its history, to immediately clamp down on a problem. And so there's a judgment call that has to be made by members of the magisterium. What we can say is that the Holy Spirit does guide the magisterium in the overall exercise of its ministry, and when necessary, the magisterium may infallibly or definitively settle something, but we shouldn't expect it to do that in a way that automatically gives us smooth sailing in the future. There have been problems in the past, and there are likely to be problems, and there are problems now, and there are likely to be problems in the future. But ultimately, this all rests in God's hands, and we can trust God to guide us through these issues.
Alpha 4, the fourth, thank you very much for a fascinating question. Next one, we've got time for another one before I have to take a break. EFBI 2225. I feel like I'm supposed to see something in that, but I don't see it. EFBI. Oh, FBI.
I saw an FBI in that, yeah, but I don't know why there's an E in front of
or why B is spelled the word B.
Yeah, BEE.
Yeah, EF. I don't know. All right, EFBI wants to know this. Hi, Jimmy. Can you comment on Luke chapter 9, verses 49 through 50? Where Jesus told his disciples not to stop other individuals, not of their group, who were driving out demons in Jesus' name. I always treat this passage as Jesus seemingly giving permission for other Christian sects like the Protestants to operate.
Okay, well, I would say, so let's start with the text itself. So EFBI 2225 asked about Luke 9, verses 49 and 50. So here's what they say. Now, the disciples have just seen someone casting out demons who's not part of their group. And verse 49 says, John answered, Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he does not follow with us. But Jesus said to him, do not stop him, for the one who is not against you is for you. Okay, this is an interesting passage. And it has a positive attitude towards outsiders who are not against you. But what can we infer about that when it comes to modern denominational groups? Well, I think we can infer that to the extent other denominational groups are not opposed to the Catholic Church, we can welcome them and appreciate them and so forth. But does that mean that they fully correspond to the reality of what Jesus wants for his church? Meaning being in separation from the Pope and such. And I would say, no, we can't infer that. In fact, let's back up and think about this situation in its original historical context. Now, this is happening in Luke chapter 9, and that's before Luke has his passage where Jesus gives St. Peter special power among the disciples. That's something that happens in Luke chapter 22. And so this is well before that. Once Jesus has given Peter his special commission, which happens in different stages in the three gospels that mention it. But once Jesus has developed his church fully, I think it would be expected that, well, this guy, this unknown exorcist, would be expected to ally with the Christian movement. If he's at this point, appears to be a Jewish exorcist who is casting out demons in Jesus' name, and that's good. But if he never progresses further than that, then once Jesus's church is established, whether you consider its birthday at the crucifixion or at Pentecost or whenever you consider it, this guy is not going to be fully corresponding to Jesus's will for him. He wants people to join his church, and that's going to have implications for, do you recognize Peter's authority as the leader of that church and so forth. So I think this passage is addressing a period in church history where Jesus's church is not yet fully formed, and that puts a limit on how much we can draw lessons from it that apply to today, when Jesus's church has been fully formed for almost 2,000 years. You could say it would be anachronistic in this period to insist that everybody join Jesus's church when Jesus's church isn't even instituted yet. But now that his church is instituted, people need to embrace it. And I think that would apply to this unknown Jewish exorcist as much as anybody else. So I don't think you can use this passage to establish that it doesn't matter to Jesus whether you're part of his church or not. I think you have to look at what he elsewhere says about his church to figure that question out. But I do think this articulates a principle that can help inform our attitude towards others who are not in full union with us. Given that they're not in full union with us, can we still have a positive attitude towards them? Well, yes, it doesn't mean approving of the fact they're not in full union with us, but assuming they're not, we can still regard them as brethren in Christ and as allies. If they're not against us, they're for us. And so to the extent they're not anti-Catholics, we can regard them as allies in Christ.
Thank you very much, EFBI, for the question. We got to take a very quick break. Right back with more questions for Jimmy on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, "When we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue." Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Isn't it awesome that we today do not recognize His presence in the Eucharist? Is it because we really don't go to Him in humbleness of heart and say, "Lord, I don't believe, help my unbelief. Lord, I want to see you. I want to recognize you. I cannot live without you." Are we saying that?
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Got Jimmy Akin this hour and last hour, and still lots more questions to go. So back to the questions we go. Nicholas Roman, N1N3Y, wants to know this, Jimmy. Well, two questions, actually. Why are the Gospels in the Bible in the order Matthew, Mark, Luke, John? It seems odd to break up Luke, Acts, unless that's the order in which the evangelists wrote their Gospels. Also,
okay, let's
deal
with that question first.
Okay.
So I understand the question from Nicholas. It presupposes that the canonical order of the Gospels is something that goes all the way back to the beginning. He's asking, he says it seems odd to break up Luke, Acts, unless that's the order in which the evangelists wrote their Gospels. So he's presupposing that this canonical order of Matthew first, then Mark, then Luke, then John is the chronological order. And that's something that historically has been debated. In what we can show is that there are I guess I can put it this way. What we can show is that there has not been a consistent ordering of the Gospels. Originally, when the Gospels were written, they were not all in a single book. You had Matthew was one scroll or codex. Scrolls and codices are different forms of books. Mark was one scroll or codex, Luke was one scroll or codex, and John was one scroll or codex. And then as book technology improved and it became possible for Christians to fit multiple Gospels in a single volume, they then had a question about what order are we going to put them in? And different Christians came to different answers on that. In the tradition that modern English Bibles follow, and many other Western Bibles follow, it became common to put Matthew first, then Mark, then Luke, then John. But that is not universal. There are other traditions in Christian history which put them in different sequences, particularly Matthew and John get put first in a bunch of traditions, and then Mark and Luke get put later in those traditions. And you could propose various reasons for that, like, okay, Matthew and John are both apostles, whereas Mark and Luke are not. So you might want to put the apostle gospels first and then the non-apostle gospels. So there are a number of different sequences that these have been put in, and they don't all go back to the first century. In a single volume, and that means that we can't trace this sequencing back to the first century. So I would say that the reason that we, and this would be somewhat speculative on my part. But I think the reason that that Matthew, Mark, and Luke get put together in the common Western ordering that we use today is they are the synoptic gospels. They all tell the story of Jesus from a similar point of view. They include many of the same stories compared to John, which takes a different approach. So it makes sense to keep Matthew, Mark, and Luke together because they're also similar to each other, and then to have John as kind of here's the outlier after them. And if you do that, then you want to keep all four of the stories of Jesus together, and you put Acts afterwards, because it's not the story of Jesus, it's the story of what happened after Jesus. So it wouldn't make sense to go Matthew, Mark, John, Luke, Acts.
Right.
I mean, that would keep Luke and Acts together, but then you've got John interposed between Luke, which is a synoptic, and Mark, which is a synoptic. Another way you could do it would be, that would solve the problem a little better, would be to put John first and go John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts. The problem with doing it that way is we do have evidence that John wrote later and is responding to what's in the synoptics. So it would be weird to read John, which responds to the synoptics, first, rather than knowing what he's responding to. I mean, for example, early on in John's gospel, you'll be reading about John the Baptist, and it'll say, this was before John was put in prison. And if you haven't read the synoptics, you're like, what? John is put in prison?
Yeah.
John's gospel doesn't mention that anywhere else. He expects you to already know the synoptics, so it makes sense to place John after the synoptics, which means you need to stick him by preserving the gospels together, and then Acts, you need to stick him between Luke and Acts, even though that's a little weird since Acts is a continuation of Luke. So that's what I have to say about the first question that Nicholas Roman asks.
All right. Nicholas Roman then also went on to write, also, what are your thoughts on the dating and authorship of Job?
Okay, well, we don't know who wrote Job because it doesn't tell us the name of the author. And that's typical for many books in the Old Testament. There are some which do reveal their authors' names. That's particularly the case with the literary prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. But for most books, they didn't tell us who the author was, and we're not told who the author of Job was. So I'd say we have to leave that in silence. When it comes to date in the book, it's about a character, namely Job himself, who lives in the period of the patriarchs. Job himself does not even appear to be an Israelite, but he does appear to be a worshiper of God, and he appears to live in the age of the patriarchs. But the text of the book does not read like it was written in that period. Mm-hmm. It reads like it was written in a much later age. And specifically, it's been proposed that Job was written in the Persian period. So this is between the 500s BC and the 300s BC. And you can tell by the language and the loan words that were being used in the text that it sounds like it's coming from this Persian period. So I haven't done a detailed study of the chronology of Job, but I don't have any reason to challenge the idea that it dates from the Persian period. It appears to be a work of historical poetry. Most of Job is a big poem, and it appears to be about a figure set in the past as a way of harking back to God's dealings with his people early on, and representing Job as this ancient, revered figure of wisdom in terms of how he dealt with his sufferings and God. And that conveys lessons for how a wise person today would deal with their sufferings in relation to God. And so it looks to me that this is a more recent writing about an ancient figure in the form of poetry.
All right. Thanks, Nicholas. Two very fine questions. This question comes from Catholic Gauze. What is the deal with Malachi Martin? I don't hear about him as much anymore. He used to be big in anti-Vatican II fringe circles, but now few talk about him.
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons that fewer people are talking about him now is he's dead. And so
That'll
he's not
happen.
writing any new salacious books for people to talk about. I like the Catholic Gauz's question, what's his deal? Do you ever watch it's by Ryan, what's his name on YouTube, the Pitch Meeting show.
No.
Where you have a Hollywood scriptwriter and a Hollywood producer, and the scriptwriter is pitching ideas for, we could do a movie like this, and it's some movie that's in the theater. And as the scriptwriter, Ryan will say, so there's this character named Bob, and instantly the producer will say, what's his deal?
I've not seen that.
Yeah,
No.
it's really funny. You've obviously been living under a rock, but in terms of Malachi Martin and what his deal is, I plan on doing an episode of Mysterious World about Malachi Martin. I haven't done it yet, but I've been gathering research materials for it. And what I can tell you is Malachi Martin, he was an Irish priest who had a really weird career, during which he reinvented himself several times. And it frankly looks like he was an opportunist. That he would, when in the 1970s, when it looked like liberal theology was the way to go and that was how to make money, even though he wasn't an active priest anymore, he would write liberal books. And then by the 1980s, he realized, I could make more money now that the liberal theology is starting to fade, by going to the other end of the spectrum and starting to write more conservative stuff. But he writes stuff that contains loads of speculation and he's not scholarly as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
His writings contain lots of salacious stuff. They contain lots of speculation, and frankly, they're not reliable. So I would say Malachi Martin is an unreliable figure who just scratched some people where they itched. And he's now passed on, and he's not cranking out new salacious books. And so I wouldn't say there's nothing accurate in his writings, but I would say you got to take him with a whole bunch of salt, because he is just not reliable.
All right. Thank you very much for the question, Catholic Gauze. What you want to do, Ryan B's question? You got
Yeah,
time
sure.
for it? All right. Ryan B 4780 asks, you said in the past that some animals show signs of primitive rationality. How would this affect the personhood of animals?
Okay, well, I don't know that I said primitive rationality. I would say they show a primitive form of intellect. I tend to reserve rationality, and I'm not saying I couldn't have slipped and said it, but I tend to reserve rationality for humans. Humans have a certain level of intellectual development that we call rational. And I tend to associate the term rational with humans, and intellect is the broader term that I would tend to apply to both to humans and to other creatures. If something has the level of intellect that humans do, I would say it's got a rational intellect. But other creatures obviously have mental abilities. They have, intellect of some form, just not on the level that humans do. Dogs are smarter than mosquitoes, for example. You can train a dog, you can't train a mosquito, not near as easily anyway, or to do near as many things. Even some dogs are smarter than other dogs. So we can clearly see intellectual abilities on the part of animals. They're just not on the level of humans. So that will then have an impact on the question of personhood. Now, the classic for animals, the classic definition of personhood is a person is a rational substance is an individual substance of a rational nature. Rational meaning human level. And so if dogs and other animals have intellectual abilities, but they're not on the human level, they're not going to be rational substances the way we are, and they're not going to be persons under that definition of the term. But This is a philosophical term. It can mean different things to different people. And I'm afraid because of the music, that's where I'm going to have to leave it for today.
Ryan B., thank you for that very rational question. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World today. It's on radioactivity, the history of radioactivity. Check it out, mysterious.fm or wherever you get your podcasts. Jimmy Akin, thank you. I always enjoy the hours.
My pleasure.
That'll do it for us. We'll see you next time. God willing.